Hey folks, good to be back. It's been a while, but we're going to go ahead and finish up our lecture on mind and matter and look at the solutions of the natural man, the natural person, in poetic, psychedelic, and psychological experience. Something that's worth noting is that I'm not coming at this from the perspective of all of this being actually a solution. I'm merely trying to analyze it and show what it leads to. So without further ado, let's get into it. Our essential question, the essence of what we're getting at, is how does one discern logos? How does one discern the word? How does one discern the structure of all of existence? And to say that we don't want to discern that structure would be disingenuous, because we all have ways of doing it. But we want to discern what exactly that structure is and see how people have done it in the past and if it perhaps succeeded for them or if it failed. So the first person we will look at is the harbinger of poetic sense-making, William Blake. And he wrote a selection called "There is No Natural Religion." And he had a couple of statements that he would make in that. This is taken from the Complete Poetry of William Blake. His first statement is that man cannot perceive through any other way but through his bodily organs. Number two, his reasoning power can only compare and judge of what he's already perceived. So you have a little bit of Hume here, possibly. Skip ahead a bit to his sixth dictum, and he says, "The desires and perceptions of men, untaught by anything but their sense organs, are therefore limited to objects of those sense organs." And he concludes that therefore there is a need for a go-between or an intercessor between the physical realm and the spiritual realm, what he would call the poetic, the prophetic, and perhaps the bodily would be the philosophic and experimental. And he says that the body, the philosophical and experimental categories, would soon be at their end if the poetic and prophetic did not stand in between, in the gap. So take that for what you will. An example of this would be perhaps his poems and his renderings physically in art of those poems. This depiction right here is from his great epic of the angels in heaven and also in hell, somewhat Miltonic in nature, except not as orthodox, because everybody plays a role. Even the evil angels play a very, sometimes heroic role. But notice the way he depicts this. We'll get into a citation to prove this in a second, but the bodies of the angels and the bodies of the giants and the mythical figures are always going beyond their mere physical space. There's something almost impressionistic about them. The boundaries of their habitation are always being broken. They kind of vibrate in this hue of red, not just the black outline that gives them their symmetry. And this is seen in his poem, "When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee, tiger, tiger burning bright in the forests of the night? What immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry?" Fearful symmetry gets into this idea of logos, this idea of structure, that there is a fearful symmetry to existence. And there's certain parts of it that he asks the question, who put this symmetry into motion? It's too grand for our words to describe. So you see here, it's going beyond the mere sense organ. He's trying to be that go-between between the bodily world and the poetic world of the forms, if you want to call it that. He does that in his art, in the renderings of his poems, and he does that in his poems themselves. You can see that again here. I have not been able to find a rendering of the tiger poem that is available for use, but this is his rendering of the temptation of Eve. And in this, you'll notice that he's not depicting things as they really would present themselves. He's emphasizing color, he's emphasizing contrast, perhaps the innocence, maybe even the sexual nature of what's going on. And we can see here, especially in this quote from Anthony Medea, a doctoral candidate at DePaul University, he says, quote, "Blake is reflecting on the fact that bodies are capable of transcendence through a revolution that must be enacted upon the body through the body." Now, obviously, we wouldn't be aware of this if the artist, from William Blake's perspective, didn't step into the gap. He says again, quote, "Blake moves entirely into the visionary world." This is Michael Davis, 1977. "He takes his readers with him to question the source of good and evil and of their possible reconciliation. The enigmatic picture of the tiger." The poem, below the poem, is ferocious in some copies, tame in others, but realistic in none. And this goes back to how he turns away from the merely philosophic and experimental mode of being. He believes you need the other side. For him, mind and body are brought into union through the artistic instinct. He finds the structure that unifies things through that artistic zeal. That is, in a sense, if you take Heraclitus' definition at face value of logos being structure, and this common reason held between all, if you take that at face value, then William Blake is declaring for us his logos, that thing that brings things into unity. So, moving on from William Blake, we'll talk about Carl Jung. Jung looks for his logos in the world of the inner world of dreams, where ideas are able to play with the human person in free fashion. He says, quote, "Your visions," and I put in question mark, perceptions, perhaps, "will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside," you could think of that as William Blake's philosophic and experimental mode of looking, "who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." And again, he says, ideas spring from a source that is not contained within one man's personal life. We do not create them. They create us. So, all of these people are admitting of a realm that is above the physical, above the experimental. And they describe this realm as the realm that gives thingness and unity to everything else. And every experience is always interpreted through that lens. But nevertheless, he says, the subjective experience is objective. It's a piece of the world. And what issues from that subjective experience comes from a universal soil. If you've read his book, Man and His Symbols, you'll notice that dream imagery is all subjective to the individual, but nevertheless, because it happens again and again in the same way, with the same symbols and the same figures cropping up in dream after dream, he would argue that it's because of these ideas cropping up again, that they deserve to be called true. These subjective ideas that are related to the subject being man and humanity at large. So, getting into someone who goes furthest to perhaps unify all of these ideas, we'll talk about Aldous Huxley in his book, The Divine Within. He goes a long way to describe in as many ways as possible, using some of Jungian language, some Catholic language, some Hindu language, some Buddhist language, to describe what exactly it is, this logos, this structure of everything, Godhead, ground, Brahman, clear light of the void, unmanifested principle of all, He describes it as transcendent, completely above us, yet immanent within us and close to us, possible to love, know, identical, become identical with, and that it must be followed. And yet again, if you relate this to Heraclitus' definition, Heraclitus talks of the Logos as something that should be followed, that everybody should listen to, but they don't. And they don't achieve their final end as a result. And the more there is of the self, the less there is of this Logos. And this journey, perhaps, and this isn't what he says, but I'm going to call it a journey for the sake of argument. This journey perhaps accounts for the facts of history. So looking back, to make this a little bit more grounded in the Christian idea of Logos, the Word made flesh, not to say that this conception of the natural man is the Word made flesh, but nevertheless, Aquinas experienced something known as infused contemplation. And after that, he refused to continue with the Summa Theologica because he saw something that completely changed him. It got him down to the roots of being. And I found a quote on a Catholic website that describes it pretty well. By acquired wisdom, he marvelously synthesized the knowledge of the philosopher and the theologian, and the gift of wisdom raised him to the highest degree of infused contemplation, union with God, often accompanied by ecstasy and the gift of tears. It taught him what human language could not express. It was this supernatural, infused contemplation which prevented him from dictating the end of the Summa. What he could put in words seemed to him only straw in comparison with what he beheld. So, going back to Huxley's quote, there is something that transcends and is so far above, and everyone is looking for means to get to it. For William Blake, it is the poet as priest, hearkening back to this old pagan belief that the poet is ultimately going to be the most spiritual person in the village or the tribe. Jung, his means is perhaps dream, where ideas are at full freedom. And Huxley, anybody who's read Doors of Perception knows exactly what he believes. It's a drug experience that gets someone to this point of finding the key to the door. And to get there, however, all of the positive pleasures tend to become emptied of meaning. Not enough. One reaches a point where one says, even of Beethoven, even of Shakespeare, is this all? And this shows you how deep someone can go, and how shallow many people are in their plumbing of existence and of being and of their asking of questions. So in all of these people, we see that they're all looking for a universal sacramental experience. They're looking for the clear white light of the void. They don't want to be afraid. They don't want to be afraid. They want to call it friend. They want to go forward fearlessly into that light of the void. And so the answer to our question, how does one discern Logos, is very general, taken through deduction of all of the methods of the natural man. Man cries out for transcendental means of grace, whereby he might find the structures in being, and not just the structures, but perhaps the builder himself. Thank you for listening. Here are our citations for this talk, and feel free to comment or ask questions or discuss as you will, and I hope this has been thought-provoking.